Developing countries have been a focus for the global growth for the past decade, and despite the financial crisis, they still occupy the center stage in terms of determining the future growth of the global economy. China is one of those growth engines that's driving prices of commodities and real estate upwards. For more on the mainland's role and also the developing world, we're joined by Margaret Myers, Inter-American Dialogue Program Director. Welcome to Biz Asia America and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let me first start asking you, China's influence. We've got two major pieces of news this week, what's happening in Latin America with Hugo Chavez, also what's happening in China with the NPC conference going on. There's a lot of talk about the growing importance, and the fact that I suppose we're covering both stories so intently shows the impact and the power of developing countries. What is China's influence right now on developing countries?
China's influence on developing countries really ranges significantly from region to region, and I'll focus specifically on Latin America, given that that's sort of my area of focus. But I mean, China's influence in Latin America, you can see in a wide variety of ways, but most specifically in terms of economic engagement and trade in particular. So right now, China is the top trade partner for three countries in the region: Brazil, Peru, and Chile. And according to the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean, Chinese trade with Latin America has more of an influence on the region's development prospects than does trade with the United States. So,
I mean, they're massive trading partners. We can go through all the numbers, but it's extremely impressive especially when you compare it to just a decade ago.
Exactly.
And that leads kind of to the next question, which some folks might think it's a silly question, but I think it's quite relevant, and that is, has the term and definition of developing country changed over the past decade?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, China itself, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China says that, you know, China has made great progress in terms of comprehensive power, but is still very much a developing country. And I would tend to agree with that assessment. I mean, the challenges that China faces, the development challenges that China faces, are really those that you encounter in developing countries, especially when we're looking at sort of, you know, the massive central provinces and western provinces in China. But that said, I mean, this developed distinction is a very important one when we're talking about, you know, climate change negotiations or in various other international fora. So it's not one without implications. Specifically
on the economy, you know, there are a lot of similarities between a lot of developing countries: dispersion of wealth among the population, ensuring that there's fairness, and all these things combined help to ensure a healthy economy. What is going to be the greatest challenge for these developing countries, whether you're in Asia or in Latin America?
In Latin America, often what's talked about in terms of sort of development over the next decade is a need to promote more in the way of education, obviously, innovation. Productivity is mentioned in most every country in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. These sorts of fundamental issues that have always, you know, in some form or another been a problem for Latin American countries. China, in many ways, shares some of the same development challenges. It's looking more at sort of the widening rich-poor disparity and also at a middle-income trap problem. And it actually looks to Latin America in journals, in academic journals, to see kind of, you know, what sort of approaches Latin America has taken toward addressing these problems. And there's room there for sort of both to learn from one another.
You've done a lot of research, and I just want to ask you one last question about how the West is dealing with developing countries, because that's certainly changed as well over the past couple of decades as more power now shifts to developing countries.
That's right. I mean, and again, the West deals with each country, you know, very differently. And developing countries, as you mentioned, I mean, the term covers a wide variety of countries. But a really important distinction, I think, between the U.S. and China is the type of aid that's being given. And it's very, very different the way that the U.S. and also the EU approach aid, and then China approaches aid. Often China will use concessional lending. It doesn't abide by OECD standards for lending, and so it does things a bit differently and invests in certain sectors. It lends for infrastructure projects, for agriculture projects, and Western aid is a whole nother beast.
It's complicated. Thank you very much for your time. Margaret Myers from the Inter-American Dialogue Program Director. Thank you very much.